Unlock your potential with the Graduate Certificate in Arts Entrepreneurship from the Weitzenhoffer Family College of Fine Arts at the University of Oklahoma. In partnership with the prestigious Price College of Business, this innovative program is expertly designed for the aspiring arts entrepreneur, blending your creative and artistic talents with the business knowledge, skills, and strategies needed to successfully launch and manage arts-related enterprises. Affordable and fast track, you can achieve this transformative education remotely in less than 12 months. To learn more and to apply, visit ou.edu/finearts. Megan Williams Dance Projects presents the world premiere of Smile, Though Your Heart is Aching, April 5th, 6th, and 7th at the James and Martha Duffy Performance Space at Mark Morris Dance Center in Brooklyn, New York. In collaboration with acclaimed composer Eve Beglarian, Williams has created a lush movement landscape drawing on themes of love, passion, desire, loss, and yearning. For tickets, visit mwdanceprojects.com or click the link in the description of this episode. I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. On today's episode of Conversations on Dance, we are joined by internationally acclaimed ballet teacher and professor at Indiana University, Michael Vernon. We talked to Michael about how his early artistic influences shaped his life's work as a teacher and choreographer, his own philosophy on how to approach ideas in the classroom, and how he is shaping the young dancers of Indiana University today. Good morning, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been wanting you on for so long. Rebecca and I were just saying you are possibly our most requested guest, interview guest.
Yeah. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
I think like myself, anyone that you've ever taught, I think they carry that with them for a long, long time. So
it's very nice of you to say. Appreciate that.
So since it's your first time on, we always circle back to the beginning, and we would just want to hear a little bit about how you first became invested in ballet and what that journey was for you. When did you start taking ballet seriously?
Well, the very beginning is that, I was born in London, in a suburb of London, and both my parents were immigrants from Germany. They left during the fascist era, and my mother especially, she loved ballet. And she loved opera too. And so she would, and her friend would go to the Opera House, Covent Garden. It's 40 minutes by tube, as we say. Mm-hmm. And then one day, she was also fascinated with the royal family. And in those days, the Opera House had galas every year. They're sort of fundraisers, because they were hard to get tickets for, which was done by lottery, but the Queen would attend. And so for my mother being German, it was a big deal. And so when I was 8, she took me to one of the royal galas at the Opera House. And I mean, just first of all, to be in London, and, you have to get there half an hour before the Queen does, and the excitement and the pomp and circumstance off stage is just as theatrical as it is on stage. Mm-hmm. And, I was just enthralled by it. And then the ballet, I sort of, believe it or not, I still have some visions of it when I was 8. And Margot Fontaine and Svetlana Berezova and a woman called Rowena Jackson, and they were doing Ashton and ballets like Birthday Offering, which aren't known so well. I think the Joffrey did it recently. And I mean, once I saw that, that was it. So in the back of my mind, I always knew that that was something that I wanted to pursue. But for family reasons and just for practical reasons, I didn't actually start dancing till 6 or 7 years later. Oh, wow. And then we moved from that area, we moved to another area of London called Hampstead, and there was a teacher there who was 10 minutes by bus from where I lived, and she had danced with Ninette de Valois, who is we called her Madam, once I got to know her, she founded the Royal Ballet. But before she founded the Royal Ballet, she choreographed dances for Shakespearean plays, because they're actually written with a lot of dance in them. That was at the Old Vic Theatre, which became the Old Vic, the Vic Wells Ballet became the Royal Ballet eventually. And so I studied with this woman who danced in the operas with Madame, and she was also a choreographer. And that's how it all started in an area of London called Swiss Cottage. And it was just, from there I went on to the Royal Ballet School, and I was there at a very interesting time. My classmates were Yuri Killian and Reed Anderson, and
wow.
Yuri was a friend of mine in those days, and Reed too, and lots of others who became principals with the Royal Ballet. It was a very star-studded class. So I learned a lot from all that. It didn't like me, because I was never a star dancer, but it never affected my my love of dance. I remember we were competitive, but I wasn't jealous. I was just admiring their prowess. And we had great teachers, and Madame Ninette de Valois taught us once a week, and it was just a great link to the past. And Rudolph had just left Russia and was dancing with Margot, and they used a lot of us, especially the guys, on stage as like extras or supernumeraries or apprentices, except they didn't call it that in those days.
Yeah.
So we danced like in the back row of a dance in Sleeping Beauty, and one of the peasant dancers in Act Two. It was just a wonderful experience. And then we were also put into the operas, and we got paid really well for it. And today's so I was at I danced a lot with the Royal Opera Ballet. And that was so nice. I mean, just great stars, Aida, choreographed by Peter Wright, and Monica Mason as the lead dancer. I can't remember what they called us in those days. It was just a remarkable experience. So growing up with the opera and the ballet, even not being a full member of the company, I mean, I was the type of person who learned just from the experience. And I've kept those, because the standards, that was when Rudolph did his first production of The Shades from Bayadere. I mean, it was pristine. I mean, when I just remember the look of the ballet and the lines and just the elegance and the standards were so high. And I think I've kept that with me all the time.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your teaching influences at that time. Well, I guess also, did you always have an idea? Could you think ahead a few decades and see yourself as a teacher or a leader at this point in your life? That was not on your mind at all.
That wasn't on my mind. But what was on my mind was to be a choreographer. So the Royal Ballet in those days, they just started their choreographic workshop, where the dancers of the company would, choreograph something. And I can't remember which theatre we used, but some small theatre in London. And the school asked me, I think, whether I would be interested, because they knew I was interested in choreography. And they asked me if I'd like to choreograph a ballet. So I did. And I was the first student ever to choreograph for the Royal Ballet Workshop. And I sort of, I'm not saying the ballet was good or my choreography was good, but I knew this was something that I wanted to pursue too. And then I won a scholarship, a fellowship, a Winston Churchill fellowship to come to the United States to study. It was called Classical Ballet in a Modern Idiom. It was like so before its time. We could choose our own subject, and the Winston Churchill fellowship was money that had been raised after Winston Churchill passed away, and it was very philanthropic. So it was many diverse professions, if you like, and they chose the profession each year, the board of the trust. And one year it was opera and ballet. So it just happened to be my year was opera and ballet. So it was really exciting. So I talked to them and they offered me a scholarship. And then they said that this is what you should call it, because I described my ideas. And my ideas had come not because I'd seen ballet in London from the United States, but I saw Alvin Ailey and Martha Graham, and they made such huge impressions on me of what dance could do and what dance could say. Because we had nothing like it. They just started the Graham Centre, as we used to call it, in London. So Robert Cohen had started that. And I'd taken Graham classes even when I was at the Royal Ballet School, just because I was interested. So I always had an interest in dance, not just ballet, even though that was my love. So that was really the beginning of contemporary ballet, I think. And then I came to New York, of course, and spent most of my time in New York. So, and I remember the very first, I could do whatever I liked. It was a lot of money. I could do whatever I liked with it. Anyone could. So the idea was that you go back to your country, and because it was for overseas study in whatever field it was, they had nursing and government this and teaching, all sorts of stuff. And that you go back to the UK and you enrich your field with what you'd learned outside. So it's a wonderful scholarship. So I went to New York. They gave me money for 3 months, very generous amount for 3 months, and I made that last for 9 months. So I stayed in New York. I actually got a scholarship to American Ballet Theatre School, studied with Lillian and teachers like Perrier Slavek. And in those days, that was where to go in balletically, apart from Stanley's class. There was It was ABT, and so there was Perrier Slavek in class, and you stand to me here, Carla and Margot. I mean, all these famous people were in class all the time. I mean, it was just in this tiny studio with some, with one of her friends, Russian friends, playing the piano. It was like, I was really lucky that I had some really great experiences and was able to learn at every step of the way.
As a listener of Conversations on Dance, we know you love the art form. But if you were an audience member, have you ever wondered what it would be like to try a ballet class? We know that stepping into the studio as a ballet enthusiast can be very daunting, but fortunately, Art in Motion has created a safe space for all dancers, from pre-professional through to adults. Art in Motion was founded in 2015 by former Ballet West dancers Alison DeBona and Rex Tilton. Art in Motion's popular adult summer intensive program returns this May 27th through June 1st. This program includes advanced, intermediate, and beginner classes with no prior dance experience needed for the beginner level. Let Art in Motion be the bridge between the audience and the studio. Come dance this summer. For more information, visit artemotionballet.school.com or click the link in the description of this episode.
You mentioned that you said, I don't know if the first ballet I did was good. And I think sometimes there's a pressure for choreographers now, right? That if you don't hit it the first time, if it's not a smash hit, forget about it. So I wonder how you were able to kind of continue to work with dancers, continue to hone that craft, because of course it's like ballet too, right? You have to work and work and progress.
Well, that's very perceptive because, so I spent like 9 months in New York, and I traveled to San Francisco, and I saw the country. But basically, it was New York, because there was just an incredible amount of dance. I remember I arrived whatever day. The next day, I didn't go to ballet. I went to see Paul Taylor at City Center. It just blew me away. And then the next day was the matinee at State Theater, as it was called in those days. And I can remember that because it was Bizet, Symphony in C, with Mimi Paul in the second movement, and she'd do this développé and with the lift, and she just, never seen dance like that. Okay. And I remember it was also Chai Pa with Patricia McBride, who I worked with now in Chautauqua, and Eddie, who I'd worked with. I became his assistant later on. And those leaping fish dives, in the coda. When I saw Balanchine, I sort of stood still, because we did do 1 or 2 Balanchine ballets in the Royal Ballet, but they were sort of at half speed, if you know what I mean. They accommodated the dancers because it's sort of to be expected because the training's so different and just the thought process about the art form is so different in the UK. Well, it was in those days. Now it's much more developed. It's so advanced now. But in those days, it wasn't quite so forward thinking. It was more conservative, just like the British are anyway. I always think that dance is very relative to countries, to nationalities, has national characteristics. And in America, and you can see why, but Balanchine is always talking about the athleticism of dancers from the South, like from Texas and Florida, because it's so open. I completely couldn't agree more. So anyway, so that was fun. So really what happened was I learned so much without knowing it from seeing dance in New York. And then I went back and I danced with what's now English National Ballet. And we had a director who is, I think, deserves far more praise for what she achieved. And that was, her name was Beryl Gray. She was the first dancer to dance in China, first Chinese person to dance in China. And she was the director. She became a Dane. And so she started a choreographic workshop just as I joined the company. That was also so fortuitous. So I did a ballet for that. And I hadn't realized how much I'd been influenced and I'd learned in New York. And how shall I say? She was very impressed. In fact, she said she thought that I should continue to work on my choreographic talents rather than continue to dance. Because she said she was so brilliant. She said it's so important to start this when you're young and you can do it. And then she said, you can't just choreograph, Michael. What you have to do is you have to teach in order to choreograph. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because choreography is all about teaching. It's like you, Michael, when you stage your ballet, I see you here. You're a teacher. It might not be your steps, but you teach the dancers how to do it. And that requires a certain way of communicating. And a certain way of understanding the dancers. Like you have to make snap decisions. They're not understanding these words. I'll try these words. And then, that's how I learned to teach. So thanks to Beryl Gray, there was a school in the UK called Arts Educational Schools. It's still there. And it was like if you didn't get into the Royal Ballet School, you went to Arts Educational Schools. And they also it was more like an American type of thought process. So they had like jazz dancing and tap dancing, and they prepared dancers for musicals as well as for ballet companies. They didn't have contemporary companies, and there were really no modern companies.
Right.
So at this point, you obviously your education is so broad, and you're seeing so many different kinds of dance, and you have this background in opera as well.
Right.
I'd love to know a little bit about what your choreographic work looked like at that point, and your teaching methods, like in the early days of Michael as a teacher. Like what were you primarily drawing from, and I guess how does it look different from what you do now?
Oh, completely different. I was like a different person. It was like, I think that whenever anyone starts teaching, you teach what you know. You have to. And so I guess I taught very much the Royal Ballet style, which is, very similar. I don't know if dancers in this country might know the RAD, the Royal Academy of Dancing.
Right.
So the Royal Academy of Dancing was founded based on the Royal Ballet style, which is Ninette Madam's style, which is based on simplicity and on detail, I would say, not on speed and athleticism. And that's also based on, I would say, a conservative, like, I don't know how to say this word, but I think like Vaganova had a say, has a spoke in a wheel somehow. So, but very down to earth, matter of fact, classes. And I had a teacher who was, he was a virtuoso dancer in his time, Donald Britton. And so classes were very simple, but very fast, because he liked to get the bar over. We had 2-hour classes. So we would do a non-stop bar, for example, And that means you just go from one side to the other, and he'd tell you the next exercise as you're doing the first.
I had a teacher who did that. I love that. They used to call it a power bar. It was so fun. I loved it.
But we had that nearly every day. And, I was not a star dancer, so I struggled with that. So I think because of that, even though I really respected him, and then so I didn't teach like that. So that was, but you learn from things, So I guess I developed my own style, and I also always knew, I was sort of like, I always knew that I needed more attention in class. And I think when I started teaching, I realized that some people just need more attention. They need to be told things in a specific way. And I think that I've developed that as a teacher. So you speak to the whole class, but you direct certain things at certain people. As I walk around, you become very personal, but in a non-personal way.
Right.
So that is that side of teaching. But style-wise, I think I just taught basically the same as I was taught at the Royal Ballet School.
Mm-hmm.
And then my teacher before, the one that I started with, had been a Cecchetti teacher. And as soon as I got to the Royal Ballet School and the RAD style there, I realized that I was much more suited to the RAD style than the Cecchetti style, which was based on exercises that Cecchetti had developed for Pavlova a lot of the time, and to strengthen her weaknesses, and it just wasn't the right sort of fit for me. So,
right.
This is bringing up something for me. This is a slight detour, but I'm been talking to this mom who I know, and her daughter is 13 years old, and she's trying to decide. She needs to go to a more professional school. She's trying to decide where to go. She's trying to figure out if she goes to a more Balanchine school or a more Vaganova school. And the mom is like, what does all this mean? So I wonder now, as a teacher, how would you tell young dancers to kind of find the style that's right for them, and kind of so that they can head in that direction in terms of what school to go to?
Oh,
maybe a complicated question.
It's a very interesting question. Yes, I do to a certain extent, but I think that they have to decide what sort of dance they want to do. And even companies that are relatively conservative, like American Ballet Theatre, require a certain athleticism now and a certain speed in the ballets. I mean, they do Balanchine too, and Robbins and Ratmansky, and I mean, apart from all the classics, and even the classics, we dance them in a different way to they were danced now, because it's life. Art mirrors, it has to go a bit faster, it has to be a bit more streamlined, and nowadays it has to be shorter. So I think that you have to go to the place which serves the art form the best, maybe not your one's particular style the best.
Right.
So I think it's the other way. I think the dancer has to adapt, not find a school in which they're comfortable, because even if you started in, say, like a Russian-based, because there's no French-based in this country. It's either Russian or American, I think, or maybe a little bit English. But I also think teachers develop their own styles, and so I think that most probably the best place to go to is a teacher which isn't bound by someone else's style, but has developed their own through the knowledge they've amassed through their experience.
So true.
That's just exactly how I feel about you. Like I never feel like we're doing something that is strictly English or Balanchine or Russian or whatever. It's all this. You are a perfect blend of all of your own experiences, and that's what you're imparting to us. So I want to take some time to get in the weeds a little bit about your teaching.
Okay.
And some of it's just like my own personal questions about what I experience in your class.
Right.
And one thing that I love is the way that you use first position, because I think for first position, for me, a lot of teachers, I don't think have the the correct approach where you use it and it puts you on your weight is distributed poorly thereafter.
Right,
You
right.
can't find fifth, but something about the way you use first is magic to me. And I
Oh,
feel like it's a, it's we're still at the end goal of fifth eventually, but I don't feel like it ever, you still very much use first. You engage with first, but it doesn't ever
right,
like derail what the path is to
right.
fifth. Can you talk about that a little?
I want to feel this. I want to feel this first position work.
It's good, Rebecca.
Well, no, we don't. I mean, I do a certain amount in first, but
Mhm.
my mantra is definitely the ballet is based on fifth position. But I teach first position is turn, of course, turn up is the legs are side by side, and fifth position is exactly the same, except the legs are front and back.
Mm.
So I think there's a huge similarity, and also partly because of my own experience, but also what I see with dancers. I think that I like starting in first, and I actually, was one of the things that I learned from Stanley, and then you have to go back to first at the beginning of each set of movements, like tendus and pliés, tendus, and dégagés.
Mhm.
So you always start again because it's easy for the dancer, I think.
Mhm.
It's easy to feel the action.
So dégagés too. So because I
Yeah,
haven't taken
yeah.
your class before, and for some, I'm sure our listeners, obviously, some of them haven't either. Tell us like what we're talking, like how many combinations are we doing in first? We're doing
A two or three.
2 or 3.
And then I also do now, because I try not to stay the same.
Right.
So I've also developed where you go from. So I talk about fifth. So for example, a tendu is always opposite fifth. So ballet is based on fifth position to me. So if your legs are closed in fifth, they're closed in grand battement. It's just
Yes.
the movement itself, which is different or a different accent, but the legs, but so when you go from fifth, you tendu opposite fifth. When you go from first, you don't tendu opposite first. When you go from first, you still tendu opposite fifth.
Right.
Thank you.
Because it has to have logic.
Mm-hmm.
And and I do teach at some places where this is not part of their regular thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one thing I don't insist on, but I always present to them the idea that the destination doesn't change, just the point where you get there. Like you can go to LaGuardia from Brooklyn or from Manhattan, you're still going to the same place.
Uh-huh.
So Brooklyn can be first and Manhattan can be fifth, so you're still going to LaGuardia.
Yeah.
That's a tendu.
I love that.
I miss New York so much, I can't help using it in my analogies.
It's so good.
It's perfect.
So good. Another thing that I always take note of is the way you use musicality. Musicality is very important in your approach to music.
Right.
And you do a lot of, I'm not musically educated, but I think it's 4/6 time signature. Like where we just.
Well, I think it would be 4/4.
Well, no, but there's something where we're doing something in 6, like you do like 5, like 5, but you rest for the 6.
Oh, okay, Michael. So it's actually to simplify it. It's like 6 is 2 3s. But that's how I break it down. But I don't use all the threes the same way. So I might do 1 2 3 1, 1 2 3 1, or 1 2 3 2 3, or
right.
And,
yeah.
But I got that from the man that we haven't talked about, the elephant in the room, if you like, is Stanley Williams. So he really changed a lot of how I thought about ballet. Not so much, I don't copy him, but I would say I emulate him. But I use some of his principles, which are that you have to train the dancers for what they are going to do. So that was his whole philosophy at City Ballet, at SAB, is that they were dancing Balanchine and Robbins. So he developed this way of teaching so that they were able to get the speed and the articulation
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I use that principle of, training. So like when I taught at Steps for so long, and I had dancers from all walks of life, if you like. I mean, some great ballerinas at the same time as people who were just coming to enjoy ballet.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to devise some sort of plan to include everyone.
Right.
So that's what I did. I trained dancers, not necessarily in difficult combinations, but in combinations that everyone could work on and develop strength from at the same time.
So you're talking about how the dancers have to be trained, or in class, they have to be doing what they are going to have to do later in the day. Like we would always not want to do a class that's all in first position when we had to do a quick balancing class, balancing ballet afterwards. So how are you kind of bringing that into your teaching, what your students are working on, what they're going to be performing? Are you influenced by that at all to kind of like help switch things up?
I think it's more general than that. It's not as specific as what actual ballets are going to do. It's more specific about where we are, like in 2024, and what ballets they're going to have to do and what the speed's going to be. Mm-hmm. So it's not a generic class. It's a very specific class. But style-wise, it allows a dancer to either go to Sleeping Beauty or to Symphony in Z or to Paul Taylor, because I had a lot of dancers from modern companies in my classes.
Mm-hmm. And or to Justin Peck. I said your class is perfect before a Justin Peck rehearsal.
Oh, I think
I can verify.
Yeah, well, I'm a great admirer of his work and what he's done, to further. So in a way, I'd like to teach with that thought in mind. Mm-hmm. That a dancer who is still ballet, and the other Peck, Tyler Peck's, and her choreography. So it's still ballet. It's just more attuned to our time, and I think that one has to teach more attuned to our time. Mm-hmm. So I think the whole, relationship between the teacher and the dancer has changed in a way, or hasn't changed, but it has to. I mean, you have to talk to people. It's 2024.
This goes back to what we were talking about before as to which style as a student would you want to pursue. Like you were saying, you want to pursue a class that is going to prepare you for what the rep is right now in 2024. Yeah.
Now, if I was teaching at the Bolshoi Ballet, then it would be slightly different because they have a different viewpoint, I think. Mm-hmm. But I think the Bolshoi has changed too.
Right.
But so.
Yeah, the rep is very different. I'm thinking, going back to what you were saying about you'd have these great ballerinas in class, but you'd also have people that are just there to enjoy your day. I think that's one of the most interesting challenges of being a teacher is how to personalize your class for different journeys. And I'm also thinking about now at IU, you have these students for 4 years and you have to think of a long range as well. It's not just like, what are we doing today? It's how am I going to develop this dancer over years? Like how does those short-term and long-term goals for you, how do they factor into what you're giving an individual?
That's another really interesting question. I've got to tell you that I'm not sure that I actually do it quite as you say. I think that because I write down a lot of my classes, but I don't actually refer to my notes ever. I teach what I see. So I'm very much, so in a way, it's sort of improvised. I mean, it's not, but the structure of the class, I do it as I go along. The dancers are tired, it's sunny, the dancers are happier. I mean, I just sense what we should do.
Right.
And I think that, like, when you're in a situation like at Indiana University, I still think that would be like a company class. You have to make sure that whatever I give them, whatever I decide is the right tempo and the right combination to give them that they execute it in a certain way with a certain viewpoint. I try and teach the dancers to have a viewpoint of where dance is going. And
yeah, I mean, you have such a clear viewpoint. And I think when I'm thinking of great teachers that I've had in my life versus a lot of teachers nowadays, I feel like are just, that we're hitting the marks. We do pliés and then we do a tendu and then but it doesn't seem to have a clear viewpoint or, it's just, it could be anything. We're just kind of going through the motions. Where do you think teachers go wrong with that? Like, why do people struggle with imparting their own point of view in a class? Is it just that experience?
I think personality. I don't want to talk about any particular teacher, but I remember my own teachers, and I don't think that they all should have been teachers.
Right.
I think teaching is, and I'd say this all the time. People think I'm crazy. Teaching isn't about teaching. You can't teach anyone. You can present knowledge in a certain way so they understand what you're saying, or they can use it to help their own technique. We're talking about ballet now. But really, that teaching is about presenting knowledge. Teaching is also about learning, and that means from the teacher's point of view. So it's like how we started, Michael. And I see the dancer, and then if they're not doing what I would like, I don't say you're doing it wrong. I say I'm telling them something that they don't understand. So you find another way of saying it. And of course, there are times when the dancer's it doesn't have the ability to do what you want. So you work that out really quickly. And then, move on or change the subject or something. I mean, I'm sort of being facetious, but, not everyone's going to understand everything. I think that's one of the hardest lessons for me as a teacher. Not everyone can do everything. Yeah. Very few can do it everything as you want. And they're like, Misha and, Makarov and,
Well, that's one thing that we've talked about before is, just because you have an incredible resume as a dancer does not translate necessarily into being a good teacher, because a lot of times some people with just really natural talent, it's just came natural to them. So they didn't necessarily have to think through these other, be like really analytical in their bodies. So it just might not translate sometimes.
No, exactly. Yeah. And some people are more analytical than others. So some people dance instinctively, and some people have to dance intellectually.
Right. Yeah. I want to. Yeah, I also want to talk about Indiana University. We've heard Michael's worked there. We've talked to people from there. We've heard just what a great program it is. And I think when Michael and I were dancing, there may have been, this thought that you don't go to college. If you want to be a professional dancer, you go straight to dancing. And we certainly see that changing as we've been doing this podcast, as we hear from you guys. So I just want to get your insight into that and hear a little bit more about how great your program is, that it really is like a company is what it sounds like to us.
Yeah, it's run like a ballet company. So you have 4 years. I mean, it takes a certain dancer to flourish here, but that's what the audition process is about. It does take a dancer who's able to and really wants to study academically as well as balletically. And there is a degree in ballet itself, but you have to do other subjects anyway because it's a university, and you have to have a certain GPA to get here, and all those sort of things. And so, but it's interesting because the dancers are intelligent. So what I was talking about, I can talk to them, intellectually, and I don't mean like on a high level. I'm just talking about, we can talk about concepts easier than you can with, say, a younger dancer who's at School of American Ballet and just wants to, dance. And so, so it is slightly different. And then the challenge is, because you have them for 4 years, and in steps, you can choose who you want. Let's go to Michael, let's go to Willie, and that was my day, okay, or Nancy or someone like that. But they don't have a choice.
Right.
So they have to go to someone. So you have to find a way of making one. Well, I do anyway. One has to make a way of find a way to make the class interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And every day is a new day, and every day has to be fresh.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It has. Yeah. So well, I do. So I have to find the way. And then I use musicality. And of course, there's going to be a certain repetition, because one can't help that. But I try and make it as less repetition as possible. Of the actual movement in the exercise, like 3 of this and 3 of that. It's very challenging. It helps me grow as a teacher. One of my aims has been never to repeat the same exercise, but recently I've realized, it's the same concept, and maybe it should just be the same exercise. If it works, it works.
Maybe do it every 4 years. You can switch over and go back.
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Yeah, have a rotation.
I'm glad you brought up the concept of repetition, because I think you disguise it very sneakily, I guess, or something. I don't know. It's like, of course, your body needs repetition, but I never in your class feel like you're not just droning through, 17 times en croix and then whatever.
Because you explain to the dancer why, but also I talk to the dancers about repetition. So repetition, the idea of repetition is so that the dancer doesn't have to worry so much about the choreography of the exercise. They worry about how to execute it. But what they can't do is become repetitious. So the exercises aren't just repeating, repetitious. It's repetition for a purpose. And that requires a knowledge of music, I think, too, but also of the technique. So
that's interesting, because there is you don't want everything to be, repetition, but when you do have something that's just like, sometimes I loved an 8 tendus en croix because you could just really be thinking about but not everyone connects with that in the same way,
No, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. I think like 8 tendus en croix is actually great. It just depends how you put it on the music. It can be like that. It can be one, that. It's up to the teacher. And then
you want to take class right now. It sounds perfect. But in my 10-year-old, body from 10 years ago would be great.
I don't know. I think Michael can bring you back, Rebecca. There were other, when I was there were other stagers, and we would sneak into Michael's class.
That's fun.
And I'm thinking about what you're saying, like going back to Belle Gray saying that that being a teacher, like putting it in your body, I think is so important. And I mean, of course, my body feels very, very different from when I was a dancer, but I think it just helps you. It informs how you are going to communicate to your dancers, and you then have a better understanding of how to communicate with them. Like when I take your class and then I go in to rehearsal for a Peck ballet, I have like more understanding of my own physicality, so it's easier for me to communicate.
That's great. That's perfect. That's exactly what one tries to achieve. I think, so the dancer understands their own body better. And that day, and how, because everyone wakes up, don't sleep well, like I said, that's pace. I mean, who knows? So come to class. You have to take a while to drop the bags, as they were, and to just find yourself in class. And I think that's partly the purpose of class. So my class is very physical, but in a way, it's a little bit like Zen. You try and like make the world go away and just start focusing. And then also focus on what you need to do that day, which could be, if you don't have a show, then, you can do this. And then if you do have a show, maybe you just want to think about coming off point softly, or your pirouette, depending, or some jazz move, or some, more freer movement. Yeah. So, and I think it's up to the teacher to be able to offer that to everyone.
Well, it makes sense to me why so many of your students have requested that we have you on the podcast. Honestly, like so many people, and we're like, we know we have to do it soon. So finally,
I appreciate
so
that.
happy.
Yeah. I miss them all. I really do. Yeah.
I'm sure you feel very connected to them.
I was going to say that if for listeners that would like to take Michael's class, there is a class online from the pandemic, and I do it all the time.
Oh, really?
So yeah, if you just Google Michael Vernon ballet class, it was from, what was that program?
I think it was called the World
Yeah.
Ballet.
Oh, ballet. Yeah.
It was two dancers from San Francisco Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it was
right,
like a donation. I remember because I would open Venmo and just everybody was like, they would be paying. I think that's how they paid for class. It was like donation based, and everyone would be like, World Ballet class. I was like, oh my gosh. So many people took it.
Yeah. I had been taking your class at IU when I was doing staging increases. And then I was like, I was talking to Jeanette Delgado, and I was like, I miss Michael's class so much. It just made me feel like 10 years younger. And she was like, well, there's the class online. So look that up for our listeners. But are there other ways outside of IU that maybe someone might be lucky enough to take your class? I know you guest teach all over the place.
Well, yeah, this summer I teach at Chautauqua for 2 weeks, but that's a very small, relatively small program.
Mm-hmm.
I go to Carolina Ballet with Zali.
With Zali.
Yes. Who, I really admire. And so that's great. And Peggy Severin Hanson, Margaret Severin Hanson, she organizes the summer. So I'm there for 2 weeks, and that's a great program. So, but it's basically programs like that. Or I go to a specific studio. There's one in northern Indiana, which is a remarkable studio called Project Ballet, where the teacher had gone to SAB, and then she started not just a ballet studio, but like my own first ballet school, it was actually an academic school, very small academic school with like private teachers, and then ballet in the afternoon, which is perfect. We're in the same building.
Sounds like heaven.
Yes. Wow. And that's in Fort Wayne of all places. So I know. Well, but I think you just have to keep an open mind. I mean, I would never have thought I would end up in India. When I was born in Dollis Hill, London, I never thought of Indiana. I never knew where it was.
Oh my gosh, it's funny. I mean, I think my mother is an IU grad, so I think she would have really liked for me to end up in Indiana. But they came to visit when I was staging there, and I think it was for them, that was like their proudest moment. Like, you might not have made it to college, but look, you're here now.
I know. That's not the first time I've heard that. I tell you one thing, because just to go back about, you asked me about teaching at IU. So we're talking about Bloomington. Bloomington is basically Indiana University. And so, we all grew up in urban areas, and, you went to SAB, and I was in London, the Royal Ballet School. I mean, there's so many influences that become part of one's training without you really realizing it. I mean, you can see a movie when you want to, a play, a musical, or a ballet, or just go to see, the company that your school's attached to whenever you want to. But here, there is only IU ballet.
Right.
So, like when the dancers leave, they have to create their own entertainment, which I know is easier now with the internet, but there's no great theater, or there's only one movie house now in the whole town, and so you have to teach with that in mind. You have to teach with constantly inspiring them, and one has to try and fill the culture gap oneself. Because I think it's so. I try and tell the dancers what I'm doing with the music, so they understand. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4. Because choreography is much, more sophisticated than that. So
the why behind what you're doing is so important, right? Instead of just do an arabesque, like, why are we doing it like this? Yeah.
Well, Michael, it's been such a pleasure having you on. It makes me yearn to be back in your class, which I'm sure I will eventually. Hopefully I'll be staging ballets at 50, and I'll still be trying to find fifth in your class.
Course. Keep going. Yeah. Never stop. And Rebecca, it's nice to meet you.
It's so great to meet you too. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that online class. Let me tell you. Okay, I got my Marley back here. I'm ready to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael.
Okay, it's great. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Conversations on Dance is part of the ACAST Creator Network. For more information, visit conversationsondancepod.com.